When it comes to selling books, what are authors really supposed to do? Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for readers, writers, and cooks. This is Kate Leahy, and I'm here with Kristin Donnelly. Hey, Kristin.
Hey, Kate.
Today, we're going to be talking to someone who is an expert in book marketing and publicity, Kathleen Schmidt. She writes a Substack newsletter called Publishing Confidential. Kristin and I both read it. You were the first person to tell me about Kathleen's newsletter, and now I see it everywhere.
Yeah, and actually it was Sally Eckes, who is an agent and friend of the podcast, who originally told me about it, just saying, you should have Kathleen on. And that was actually quite a while ago, maybe almost a year ago. But now we are finally doing that.
Right. And I know it's one of those things where I think we've read a lot of her posts and we're like, oh, what I think draws me in is she's worked behind the scenes in publishing for so long. But now that she's on her own, she can be very candid about the things she's seen that work and don't work and things that she would do to fix sort of the stuff that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So this is an author's, we don't get this information. You know, it's not easy to find.
And she has worked in so many different facets of publishing. So I think that is also so valuable. She focuses now a lot on more the publicity side, but she's worked as an editor, she's worked as a publisher, and of course, marketing and PR.
Right. Some of the things that trip up authors when you are either pitching your book to publishers or you have a book deal and now it's getting time to figure out how you're actually going to sell your book. Some questions that come to mind is, what is publicity? What is marketing? What are those two different things? What does that mean to an author? How do you find your people? How do you get the book out there? These are all things that Kathleen thinks about every day. And she has a lot of great posts on her Substack, and we'll link to those in the show notes. She not only has the Publishing Confidential Substack, she also has her own company called Kathleen Schmidt Public Relations, which specializes in, as you probably could figure out, PR, branding, marketing, consulting, and just general business strategies for authors. So she's worked for a lot of big five publishers, worn many hats, like Kristin mentioned. Today, we're going to pick her brain. So let's bring her on. Hi, Kathleen. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks.
Hi, and thank you very much for having me here. I'm excited to do this with you guys.
Well, we've been looking forward to this interview for a while. Kristin and I have been talking about it and planning it. But before we get rolling, we just thought we would get a little bit of background on your history in publishing PR, where you got your chops.
Gosh.
I know it's a long story. We'll do the Cliff Notes version.
I could do it quickly. I started in publishing almost 30 years ago. I was an English major. I kind of wanted to get into either writing or editing, but those were not the jobs paying very much in the late 90s, believe it or not. So I kind of fell into publicity because I saw an ad for a publisher who needed a publicity assistant saying, must love pop culture, must have sense of humor. So I was like, oh, that's me. So I started at Carroll Publishing, which was a small publisher in New Jersey. So I got my start in indie publishing, which I've always had a soft spot for. And then I went on to work for Pocketbooks at Simon & Schuster. I went on to spend 8 years at the Penguin Group working for Dutton Books, Plume, and Gotham Books. And then I went to Simon & Schuster again. I was the VP of publicity for Atria Books. After that, I went out on my own for a couple of years, which I wasn't ready to do back then. And then I spent 3 years at the Perseus Books Group at Weinstein Books and Running Press. I spent a little time as the associate publisher at Rodale Books, was a literary agent for 3 years. And then after that, I was publicity director at Skyhorse Publishing for 3 years. Towards the end of that, that was all through the pandemic. I was only in the office for 5 months before we shut down. In the middle of all that, I decided to get my MBA. And I am done with that as of May 4th of this year, which I'm excited about.
Yeah.
And then, the pandemic, as I am sure it changed you or people the pandemic really changed me and made me reassess where I was in my career. And I decided to leave Skyhorse Publishing and took a few months to just focus on school, getting my one kid off to college, getting another kid off to high school. And then I decided that I didn't want to work for anybody anymore. I wanted to work for myself. So I started KMSPR, which is my PR branding and marketing company. I should also mention that, while I was at Skyhorse, I didn't just do publicity. I was also an acquisitions editor. I did all their corporate communications and some marketing, and I edited books.
Oh my gosh.
So it's like 5 jobs.
Yeah.
I've done everything. There's not, and that's probably why I get so testy when people sometimes comment on my Substack, like they know the business. I'm like, listen, I've worked in almost every aspect of this industry. So it's been many years, many different things, never boring, but I'm here to tell the stories.
Right. Well, and tell us just a little bit about KMSPR. So now that you're out on your own, what do you primarily focus on?
I focus on PR and marketing. I find myself moving more into the marketing space and audience growth and building communities and things like that with authors, publishing adjacent, rather than just straight PR, because straight PR is really hard right now. Not kind of hard, it's really hard. It's hard to get reviews, it's hard to get authors interviewed. So my focus is primarily on PR, but also branding and marketing to connect authors directly with their audiences.
Kate and I were talking because we have published books, and a lot of times when we work with a publicity team, there will be somebody who does marketing and somebody who does PR. And Kate and I were like, we're never totally clear what the differences are. For our listeners who are probably like, I don't even know what any of this means. How do you describe the differences between marketing and PR when it comes to books?
It used to be a very distinguished line between the two. Marketing was always paid media, so like advertising and stuff like that. And publicity was earned media, which was, pitching media, getting book reviews, getting author interviews on NPR and what have you. Now I feel like the lines are very blurred because of social media. So marketing is really, that's a department that takes care of all of your influencer outreach, to Bookstagram, to TikTok, your promotional activities like Goodreads, giveaways, and NetGalley activities and things like that. Publicity is still publicity. Publicity is still mainly their focus is on getting reviews, interviews, and I think those lines are blurring now. And I think publicity is also connecting with Bookstagrammers and people like that. So it's a little bit harder to tell now, but marketing is definitely where you're going to find, we're doing a TikTok campaign, we're doing a Bookstagrammer campaign, we're running ads, we're doing a Goodreads giveaway. So if that makes sense, that's a hard line between the two.
Got it. Okay.
So a publicist is never going to say, place ads for you. That's something that the marketing team would do. A publicist will pitch you to NPR, to New York Times Book Review, those kinds of outlets.
Right. In the traditional sense. I mean, in smaller publishers, I think you'll find everybody does everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, I didn't go to Skyhorse not knowing how to place ads. I already knew how to do that. And I know how to deal with all the publishing trade and things like that. So publicity and marketing work very closely together to figure out who's doing what.
One of the reasons we were excited to get you on the show was because you have this great Substack that you really go into the weeds for people like us who are trying to make sense of what's going on, because, the authors were kept like, we're doing our thing. And then, every 6 months you get an email from your publisher saying, okay, here's the update. And you're kind of like, well, what else can I do? So you started your Substack, I think a year ago. It's just had its 1 year anniversary. I just think this is such a great story of how you got started. So tell us a little bit about why you went on Substack and, did you have a target audience in mind? I think you said something like you had less than 100 contacts that you started with, and now it's more than 6,000. Tell us about that.
I started Publishing Confidential back in 2016 when I was sort of between jobs. I was not associate publisher at Rodale anymore, and I had yet to start being a literary agent. So I had this idea, why don't I start a newsletter that talks about the publishing industry? Not really to compete with the publishing trades, but just to give a different spin. So I set it up on MailChimp. I was still extremely active on Twitter at the time. So I got like industry colleagues to sign up, some friends, family. I had maybe 75 emails. I did maybe 2 editions of it, and then I started agenting, and I realized that I couldn't write about it. I couldn't write about the industry candidly if I was agenting and dealing with all the publishing houses. So I kind of shelved it. And then, I had a lot of time on my hands when I was trying to decide what I was going to do next, and decided, I should probably re-up that newsletter that I was thinking of. I did it right after I started my company in 2023. I had no expectations at all. I just wrote it for the sake of writing it. And I was kind of like, I'm just going to see what'll happen. So the New Yorker had come out with a big piece about AI and the end of the English major. And I wrote a commentary on that. It got passed around. And I was like, wow, people are actually reading this. What do I do now? So as I went along, I started saying, well, I'm going to take a topic every week and write about it. Again, no expectations. And I started seeing the subscriber list grow. The one post that took me to the next level was one that I wrote called Publishing is Broken. That is what really snowballed it. That's what got passed around a lot. It's probably my best performing post to date still. And then I figured out I really do have an audience, and I see the emails that sign up. So I noticed that a lot of people from publishing houses were signing up. Some media people were signing up. I just did an interview with The Economist this morning about book publishing and the bestseller list. And they asked me what they should be covering and publishing. And I was kind of like, what? I just made a little Substack. And I started getting really great feedback from people. And no one is more surprised than I am, because my dream was always to become a writer. That's what I really wanted to do. And so having that little corner of the world in my Substack is a dream come true to me, because I get to write whatever I want to write. I get feedback from people. I am helping authors, I think, and some other people in the industry. I've gotten emails from younger people in the industry, saying how much it's helped them understand some things. And I feel like I will just keep doing it until I don't want to do it anymore. And believe me, there are days when I don't want to do it. But I do it anyway. And right now I'm just edging on 7,000 subscribers.
Wow. And you're publishing quite a bit.
Yes. I try to do one free edition and one paid edition every week. And to make it more advantageous for my paid subscribers, if I don't do a paid edition on a particular week, on Fridays, I have something I call book therapy thread. Mm-hmm. So it's actually like I'm the therapist and you're telling me your book problems and I'm answering people. And there's a very lively community that has grown out of that. And I feel really good about that. I feel, that I'm more useful outside of the industry than I am working for one particular company, because I can nudge some change along, I hope, with what I'm doing.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the post Publishing is Broken.
I think it was just a lot of news going on. It was the Penguin Random House merger had fallen through. Simon & Schuster was still up for sale. There started to be layoffs around the industry. And I'm sitting out here looking at what's happening, thinking it doesn't have to be this way. Another part of it was also just talking to authors as much as I do. Everyone thinks, oh, big 5 publisher, you have the best advantage. That's not true, because I talk to authors who are published by small presses and by the big 5, and nobody's happy. What really spawned that is that, there are just different ways that publishing could operate that it's not doing. And I decided to write a long screed about it, which got a lot of attention.
It is true, because I've mostly worked as a co-author on cookbooks, and my first co-authored cookbook came out in 2008, 2012. And it just was different then. I just remember those books just, I think they just naturally got more attention than books do now. I don't know, maybe we hadn't gotten so fragmented in our attention span. So it was easier maybe for publicists to have media that, if you landed in the New York Times, that meant something. And today, I don't know if that moves the needle. That's why, Kristin, we talk about that.
Yeah, because there was that other one, and I actually don't remember the title. I just remember it was like, "This does not sell books. This does not sell books."
I think that's the one Kristin sent me. She's like, "You got to read this."
Which, people get really upset. Some people get upset with me for writing that because they're like, well, what does sell books? And then I say to them, hire me and you'll find out. Look, the New York Times has brand equity to it, right? So if you say something got reviewed in the New York Times, it's really not so much about your book per se. It's about the brand equity that being reviewed in the New York Times gives you because you were in it. So it's a little like, people will read a review in there, sure, because they're reading the New York Times, but it doesn't mean that they're going to buy the book. It just means that they're reading the New York Times. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't sell many copies of books. Reviews as a whole, and I love my book critic friends, I will say that, reviews as a whole don't necessarily sell books. What they do is elevate an author's name and profile. But if the New York Times didn't have the brand equity that it did, would we pay attention to reviews there? No, we wouldn't, because you never really hear people say, I really want to review in USA Today. I really want to review in the Boston Globe or something else. It's all about the brand of the media you're getting. It's less about your book, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And more about tagging along to someone else's brand equity and you being a part of that, but it doesn't necessarily draw a dotted line from the review to a sale.
Yeah. And so it's like in the future, should you want to, say, get a speaking gig, or that will always be part of your bio from now on, right? It's like you had a book reviewed in the New York Times or if something hit a list, there was a best-selling author sort of.
Yeah. And that's really what it is about the New York Times bestseller list. It's less about your book and more about the brand equity and cachet that comes with being on the New York Times bestseller list, even if it is all kind of messed up the way however they calculate what books get there.
Right.
But it is a marketing device. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not necessarily the thing that's going to put you over the edge in your career.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that you write about in your Substack is just how publishing is changing. It feels like the changes have been accelerated in the past few years. I don't know, maybe that's just how it feels to me. But are you seeing really big shifts in book promotion from the past 3 years?
I think publishing has lost its way a little bit with book promotion. I was talking to an author last week who told me that the VP of marketing at their publishing house, and it was like a mid-sized publisher, it said, you should go on TikTok like Risa Tisa, like you should do that. That Risa Tisa is the woman who did the 50-part series about who she married and the guy being a pathological liar. And I just started cackling and I was like, what? That was a one-time thing. That's not, you can't duplicate that. That's not going to happen. So I was kind of surprised, like they just told her to go off and, do that. Some things are different, they're, marketing in the big publishers. I know that they do influencer boxes to send out to book talk influencers and stuff. That's different. But for the most, so much is the same. And that's the problem. I think what's changing is you're going to see different models of publishing pop up. Not so much the traditional publishers doing things all that differently.
Yeah, because I think you've talked about how there's like a cookie cutter approach a lot of times, at least within the publishing houses. Like, this is what we do, and a lot of what you advocate is a much more individualized approach.
Yeah, I am very author-centered. And the problem with working for a publisher is that you can't afford to be author-centered because you have too much work on your plate. You can't get too attached. It's not like it was in like the early aughts or late 90s. I'm talking like pre-2010, where publishers really invested in authors to keep them long-term and really developed authors, developed their talent, weren't looking for them to be a success right out of the gate, but understood that this is someone they should keep because, as they write more books, they feel like they believe in them.
Mm.
And there are still some cases of that, but not as much as there used to be. It's more common now to see someone with a one-off literary novel and have a hard time selling the second one than it is for a publishing house to keep them and keep developing them.
One hit wonder rather than like the investment approach.
Or, the editor leaves.
That's a huge problem actually right now. What I'm hearing from authors that I do consultations with is my editor left, and then my next editor left, my publicist left, and then the next publicist was really junior, and then that person left. There's no steady, in the industry. Not that there ever really was, but there was a time when people stayed where they were a lot longer. And there was a time when the turnover wasn't the way it is now. And I think a lot of that has to do with burnout. I think the pandemic changed everybody in that respect. But I also think that people are disenchanted with publishing, working in publishing. And I don't blame them, because that's why I kind of left corporate publishing.
Right. So it seems to me that we're in a situation where the marketing and publicity teams in-house at, say, Clarkson Potter or Rodale or any of these houses that specialize in cookbooks, they're supporting more authors maybe, and they have less time to support those authors. So it seems that the majority of book promotion marketing kind of has to fall on the authors to pick up what can't be done for them anymore. So like what should authors do? I mean, should they really learn marketing? Should they, hire a publicist? Does it really depend? Like if I'm an author, what should I think about right now?
It really depends, because again, I have a lot of consultations with authors, and also, on the Substack at different points, I offered like 30-minute Ask Me Anythings if people subscribe for a year. So I have talked to so many authors within the past few months. Some of them, I actually say to them, you know what, you're doing everything right. You don't need me. You don't need to hire anybody. Or some people, I advise them, go spend advertising money on Amazon instead of hiring a publicist. You're more likely to see results from that. So it really depends on the book. But, I think one of the biggest problems in publishing today is that publishing houses keep acquiring and acquiring and acquiring and acquiring, but they don't have money to put behind every single one of those books. It's not that authors need to learn marketing. Authors need to learn how to reach their audiences. And they also cannot give the keys to a publicist or a publisher and say, here, you do everything, and I'm just going to wait. Because a lot of authors do have a habit of doing that. I have to tell people sometimes you have to participate in this. It's not a situation where authors can no longer just say, I'm just going to let the publisher handle everything, because they can't handle everything. And publishers put a lot of the marketing onus on authors. What's your platform like? We can't send you on a book tour, but you can send yourself on one, those kinds of things. And who wants to do that,
Right.
So my feeling is, if I can instruct authors on how to better reach their audiences, it's better for them, because then they can kind of be armed with that information. And I think the direction that we're headed in as an industry is really reaching the consumer directly and taking a lot of the media out of the middle.
That's an interesting way to think about it, as like the media in the middle. And right now, so in the cookbook industry in particular, there are a lot of authors, or aspiring authors anyway, who are not getting deals because they're told repeatedly that their platform is too small. And a lot of times platform gets reduced to Instagram followers. Even proposals where it's like, this is an awesome proposal, this book should exist, your platform is too small for us. Like that's the kind of stuff we're hearing over and over again from cookbook authors. What do they do?
Right. We even had an agent come on our podcast who said you need 2 out of the 3 of idea, voice, platform. So if you have idea, voice, it should be enough. And it's like, well, nowadays it's like maybe the platform is maybe it has to be idea, voice, platform, all 3.
First thing I would say is that just because you have X amount of followers doesn't mean all those followers are going to buy the book.
Absolutely.
That's rarely the case, actually. I also feel like, a lot of agents and editors use the platform thing as an excuse not to take something on. It's just an easy out for them.
That
so
I
I would
see.
say that too. It may not necessarily be anything to do with anything else except I don't want to take this on because it's going to be too hard to sell just because of like market conditions.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, on the other hand, yes, it does help if they have a, you know, proof of concept, like people are going to their Instagram or their TikTok, watching what they make. I can't remember his actual name, but there's a guy, Grossi Pelosi.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And he has a pretty sturdy Instagram following, and that book did get on the bestseller list. So there's something to that. And but also his personality, I think, has a lot to do with that too.
Mm-hmm.
It's just really difficult. And cookbooks in general are hard because you could get so many recipes online for free. It's a sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't with Instagram and thought leadership and cookbooks and self-improvement, because people are getting all that for free on your page. Why are they going to pay for it?
Right.
So there's two mindsets to that. It's like you can have 250,000 followers on Instagram and you're doing all these recipes and everything, but they're not paying you. They're not paying like $40 for a cookbook for that. And who's to say they will? So I do think that it's a tough one. I always say you have to give just enough to reel the audience in, but you can't give them everything or else you're not really incentivizing them to buy your book.
We hope you're enjoying this episode of Everything Cookbooks, but it does take resources to make it happen. We'd like to invite you, our loyal listeners, to help us keep the lights on. To support the show, go to everythingcookbooks.com/support. There you can find links for any upcoming insider events where we go even further behind the scenes of the cookbook publishing world. You can also leave us a review, order books through our affiliate page, check out our awesome merch like t-shirts, sweatshirts, or you can even just buy us a round of coffee. Every little bit helps keep the show going. Thanks for listening. You've had a lot of success on Substack and you continue to grow and find your audience. Say food writers, how should we look at Substack? Is there sort of a lot of potential there, or is it one of those things where it's also maybe not give away all your recipes, but kind of create an audience that wants your personality, wants your voice?
Yeah, I mean, one of the funnest food Substacks that I subscribe to is The Department of Salad by Emily Nunn. First of all, that's a great name for a Substack. And it's not only about salad. She talks about other things too. And I think that's the key. I was talking to a friend of mine over the holidays who put out a couple of cookbooks. I was like, you know, if you wanted to expand the brand of the cookbooks, why don't you just do Substack? And I got an earful from her. There's so many of them. I don't want to be bothered. And I was just kind of like, well, okay, it was just suggestion. I love cooking Substacks. I subscribe to the Department of Salad. There's a baking one I subscribe to, and I think another one. And I think the trick there, again, is the same philosophy you'd apply to Instagram, is giving away just enough. Keep your audience, but you also grow it. And they trust you enough that they'll buy an entire book filled with your recipes. What's worked for me on Substack really well is authenticity. Mm-hmm. I am who I am. I don't pretend to be anybody else on there except who I am. And that's why I write personal posts every now and then, because so many people identify with the different things that I go through. So they see me as a person. I think that's really important too. It's important on Instagram as well. People will really hang in there and they'll root for you. You know, if they see you as a real person. I don't, airbrush my life at all. I'm still private, but I don't airbrush, my struggles with mental health or feeling like a failure sometimes or inadequate and all those things. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So I would just say be your authentic self. And the thing that I've talked about in the course that I'm teaching now is, look up a search on there and see what's already being written and look at that and look at keywords, search keywords that go into what your cookbook would be, or, the kind of cookbook you are writing or want to write, or your niche in the food world. See what's out there already. If it's not, then, that's great. But it's also very much a get what you give platform. I was just looking today, 3,000 of my subscribers came to me because other publications recommend my newsletter. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to recommend other people's newsletters, to engage on the Substack platform, to comment on other people's newsletters. There's just a lot of goodwill there, I find, but you have to participate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely its own ecosystem. And the one thing I do like about it for cookbook authors is because you mentioned Grossi Pelosi, and so much about his appeal, not just the food, of course, but the personality. And people are drawn to that very like video ready personality. And a lot of people feel like that's not their path, right? They like letting the food shine, or they enjoy writing, but not being like on camera and, doing a performance in that way. So it does feel like Substack has like opened the door again.
Right. Like old-fashioned blogging was.
Old-fashioned blogging, where voice was so important. Yeah. Yeah.
And I had way back, it doesn't exist anymore. I had a Tumblr, and I used to write on there. I used to write personal essays on there. I had Medium. I used to write personal essays on there. So it's a format I'm familiar with. There's also a website years ago where you could write personal pieces, and I used to write on there. So my writing has been out and around. Years ago, when my kids were small, I wrote a personal essay for the Wall Street Journal. It got published on there online. I wrote a personal essay for the New York Times. They used to have a motherhood vertical, and it got published on there. So I was used to, writing. I feel like what put me in a more productive writing mode was my MBA program, because I have at least 3 papers due every week.
Ah, nice.
I do them on the weekends, much to my family's chagrin. And, and so nobody's allowed to bother me on the weekend. And I have to write fast. I had a 40-page paper due for my last class. Whoa. That I did. 1 weekend I wrote 40 pages and then 2 shorter papers and took 4 exams.
Wow.
So
yeah,
I could pack it in.
So Substack is like, whatever.
Yeah,
2,000 words, sure, no problem.
Yeah. I started writing one right before I got on here. Again,
very nice.
I felt like I needed to write something about the Authors Equity publishing company that just started.
We did actually want to ask you about that. For listeners who haven't read about it, Authors Equity is a new publishing company that was announced this March. And it sounds to me, Kathleen, we'll ask you if this is right. It's essentially, instead of getting advance from a publisher, authors are getting a much bigger share of the overall profit of a book that came out. So what's your sense on Authors Equity?
I really like the idea. I have been writing a business plan for starting my own publishing company. It's not the same, but it's not all that different than what they're doing. What they're doing is a profit share with authors instead of giving a flat fee of an advance. Granted, the authors that they, first brought on are also investors, so they have a lot on the line to succeed. But I think if you do it that way, people were complaining because of that, out in the ether. And the thing that they don't understand from a business perspective is you have to launch with authors like that because your investors need to see it. If you don't launch with strong authors like that, you're not going to make the revenue that you need to bring on smaller authors. This is the way that publishing works. The backlist pays for the front list. The big authors help you afford to publish the smaller authors. This is the ecosystem. I don't think that part's going to change as much with them. I do think, though, that authors will be more invested in the success of their books. The one thing that I've read 2 pieces about, and this is what spawned me to start writing something today. Maris Kreisman wrote in LitHub that they shouldn't be hiring gig workers. Their whole model is based on no overhead. They're not going to have in-house publicity, marketing, or editorial. They're going to rely on freelancers, and authors and agents will select who works on what. That's no different than what it is now.
Absolutely.
I feel like you're not giving enough respect to those of us who are out here. We are gig workers, but we're also running companies. I don't consider myself a gig worker.
Yeah.
I consider myself the founder of a company.
Right.
I think that actually what they're doing is a very smart way to do it, because then you get different people with different specializations to work on books that you need to succeed. And sometimes in publishing houses, that just doesn't happen. And the authors end up going out and hiring someone anyway.
Yeah.
So if someone could sit here and tell me that they've had perfect experiences with every in-house department down the line, I would say, okay, yeah, it's a mistake. If the problem is that you feel like they should be giving jobs to people in the industry, that's not their job. It's not their job.
Right.
Right.
Another big Substack of mine that did well was publishing as a business.
Yeah.
Publishing as a business. It's not a nonprofit.
Right.
It's not a
Yeah.
charity.
Yeah.
They want to make money. And there are plenty of people in my generation, Gen X, that have left corporate publishing and are doing what I'm doing because they'd rather have the freedom. So there are all these really good people out here, you know, a lot of my peers that came up in the industry and people a little bit older than me. And we're all out here and we all have years of expertise. Why wouldn't you want to do it that way?
Right.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
Even just with book design, I mean, a lot of freelancers have been doing book design for years.
Oh my gosh, yes.
A lot of publishers have hired outside PR for years.
Editors, even like maybe there's an in-house acquiring editor, but they actually have somebody, like they hire a freelancer to do the editing. Publishing is a business, but you also did point out something like the backlist pays for the front list and the big authors. I always joke in cookbooks, like especially for something like Clark's and Potter, like a lot of authors are basically like subsidized by
Chrissy
Ina
Teigen.
Garten. Yeah, Chrissy Teigen and Ina Garten kind of like subsidize the rest of us. But in the end, it's still a business.
It's still a business.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can't be too precious about that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's still a business. And also, what's wrong with those of us who are running our own firms, getting business from Authors Equity? Nothing's wrong with that.
No.
Because we get business from other people. HarperCollins sends so much stuff out to freelancers already. So I don't know what the big deal is. You know, I feel like it's kind of a slap in the face to those of us who are out here doing it.
Right.
So I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that's a problem. I think the model is really interesting. I'm waiting and seeing and watching. It could be something really interesting that leads to other publishers to do this model. I recently worked with a publisher in the UK called White Box Publishing. They have a very similar model. They don't have staff. They choose from freelancers to do publicity, editorial, you know, marketing. And it's okay because then you find the right person to do the work for the book you're putting out.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Finding the best person might not be the person in-house. It might be somebody,
No,
right?
Unfortunately, no, it might not be. Over my career, there have been plenty of books that I did not want to work on. I remember when I was in my early 30s, late 20s, there were a couple of authors that I had to work with year after year. And every year, my husband can attest to this, I would cry and say I was going to quit before their book came out because I didn't want to work.
Oh my gosh.
And I hated the genre and everything.
Oh.
So, you know, why not hire someone who's happy to do that?
Yeah, that makes so much
absolutely.
more sense.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
For sure. So now we wanted to just throw out a hypothetical situation and see what ideas are generated. This is not a book that exists, I don't think. Maybe it is. If it is, listeners, I apologize, but here's just a scenario. I'm a coffee expert, and I also cook and bake with coffee. And I have pitched the ultimate coffee dessert book because I was just like, I don't think I know about a coffee dessert book, so that's why I'm using it as an example. I have a deal with a publisher. They have their PR plan, but I know I'm definitely not the biggest book on their list that's coming out that season. I might be just getting a cookie cutter approach. So What kinds of things should I be thinking of? I'm well known in the world of coffee, but I probably got a modest deal from this publisher.
Well, the first thing you should do, you know, after you look at their marketing and publicity plans is have a consultation with, you know, someone like me or someone who specializes in cookbooks who can tell you where the gaps are in those plans, because sometimes authors just don't know. They just don't know. And someone like me can tell you, well, this bullet point is just a bullet point for the sake of telling you they're doing something, and it's not really going to move the needle on your book. You also have to think about reaching your reader. Who's the audience of your book? Some people love to drink coffee, but they don't love coffee desserts. So some of it's coffee drinkers, some of it's people who like to bake or create desserts. Some of it is just people who, you know, like to eat the desserts and have somebody else make it for them. Maybe it's a gift book they would buy for someone. So it's really like, where are you going to find your community? The two things that I would look out for that are Substack, one, and Facebook too. Is there a Facebook group that you can create that's born out of this book where people can exchange like coffee, dessert recipes and things like that, and you can post on it? It's so boring when authors just make a Facebook page and that's it, and they're like, be my fan, like my page. I like engagement. I like groups where there's a lot of engagement. I'm in enough of them where I see what works and what doesn't. You really want to create a community around a book like this. And the two places to best do that, I feel, are Substack and Facebook. And then after that, think about what you need to do to connect the dots between the books and your readers and a sale of the book. I think that could be born out of the Facebook or Substack. It's not so much like traditional media. That's more of, you need to reach your audience directly for something like that.
Some sort of call to action. Would you do anything like if people like a pre-order campaign on your Substack? So, hey, you pre-order my book and I'll send you, I don't know, a t-shirt, a mug. Maybe a mug is a better thing.
Based on the amount of people who want my coffee mugs, I offered a giveaway of coffee mugs, Publishing Confidential coffee mugs. I have so many requests for them. I think I might just send everybody one.
That's awesome.
Oh, wow. People love that kind of stuff. But the other thing I would do is think about what brands can you do a partnership with?
Sure.
What brands could you do a collaboration with that could help you? I'm not talking about Starbucks. I'm talking about, smaller craft coffee brands who you mutually benefit each other. They could benefit from getting their product out there more. You could benefit from working with them and their brand. So that's definitely something I would do for a cookbook like that. The collaborations would be great.
And what about events? Should I start thinking about events, maybe with like independent coffee roasters or things like that? Do events move the needle? Or because I feel like we talk about events. I know publishers don't really like to support them unless you're like the big person of the year. But I also know that events are great for word of mouth because people get really excited about a book after they've had an experience with it. So what's your sense?
I like events where there's an activity to do. So around where I live at the Jersey Shore, there's this place that just does charcuterie boards. That's it. It's a storefront. I forget, it's Molly something or other. They send out an email, and it's actually tomorrow night. They have a charcuterie board making class, but you get booze with it, and it's $100 per person. I think there might be a cookbook involved. I'm not sure, like a charcuterie board cookbook. I would go to that. There are also like little bakeries, like craft bakeries around me that'll do like cupcake decorating. So I think with that, it lends itself well to here's how to do it kind of event. And the price of the ticket also includes the book.
Yeah, I like that. That sounds like you're getting an event. Even if you end up gifting that book to somebody else who really likes charcuterie, you've had like a nice experience, like you've gotten your money's worth.
Yeah. I mean, you have to remember something, especially since we're talking about like the hypothetical coffee dessert book. Coffee joints are where communities form. There's always a community. And there's even a little community in the Starbucks I work out of a lot of the time. Everybody kind of knows each other. Like we all kind of know where everybody sits. You're not going to take somebody else's table and stuff like that. But there's a ton of coffee houses around here where people work for the day. And I think you build a community. They're like community hubs. So something like that would work really well.
In the class you've been teaching about audience, which I've been taking, you talk about digital surrogates, which is such a great word. And it's interesting in cookbooks. I think for many, many cookbooks, publishers do want to see the author themselves having a large following. And it's very typical for these influencer, for the publishers to do these influencer mailings. But I feel like having digital surrogate is more than just like doing a mailing to authors about the book. I guess, can you explain that concept?
Finding a digital surrogate, and I will write about this soon. Finding a digital surrogate means you're connected to people, and it doesn't have to be people you already know. It's people that you cultivate relationships with that have followings on social media that are more robust than yours. Or you decide you don't want to be part of social media, which is absolutely your right. And I think it's good for your mental health if you don't want that, but you need somebody to help you push out content about your book on social media. The digital surrogate is someone who has a robust following, knows enough about you and the book that they'll say, sure, I don't have a problem, with that, and can do it in an authentic way just to help bump you up. I try to do that with my authors sometimes. I'm working with this literary writer, Scott Semigran, right now, and his book is called The Codger and the Sparrow. It's a small press putting it out, University Press. It's a literary book, but every chance I get, I post about it on Threads or, or my Instagram, whatever. And so I have a bigger following than him. So I am not only his publicist, but I'm his digital surrogate.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think it's important for, authors to find those people in their world. And that does take a little bit of work. I mean, I feel like a lot of us are introverts living in an extroverted world, and we have to push ourselves to be extroverts to get what we need to promote what we're doing. And that's okay, because 9 times out of 10, the person that you're connecting with is also an introvert. They're just maybe cope a little bit better putting their stuff out into the world, if that makes sense. That's what I'm talking about when you're doing that. It could be your friend, it could be your publicist, it could be another author, it could be a brand that you've been talking to, or a small business. It varies. It's a nice thing for people to have.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the proposal before even you get the book, that's something to put in your proposal. People that will help you get the word out, who have bigger followings than you, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Kathleen, this has been such a delight to talk with you. I know Kristin's taking your class currently. Is that class going to be offered again, or is it a digital recording people can find?
There's one more part to this class, and the only way that people have access to the videos is if they've paid for the course. The next class, though, is Book Publicity 101, and that's happening on April 14th. If you look for Publishing Confidential University on the website Thinkific it's called, you'll find it there. And it's $50 for a 90-minute class.
We'll put those all in our show notes. Kathleen, thanks again for coming on and letting us pick your brain a little bit about all the things book publicity, marketing, getting the word out.
Thank you both. I had a great time.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. And if you like what you hear, consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other people find the show. Any book mentioned can be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thanks, as always, to our editor, Abby Cirquatella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, and cooking.